An argument can be made that DPS is the least or most impactful role in Overwatch 2. With only 3 roles in the game, the deciding factor may not be just the role, but the player themselves. My name is Halzeey, and in today's video, I'm going to apprehend and dissect the DPS role, furthermore giving you a better understanding of how a DPS player should play and function within a team. If you enjoy this type of content, please consider subscribing. Enjoy. Now, to all you existing and new DPS players, I've created a 4-phase plan to help you understand what you should be doing as a DPS player. Before we get into this plan, I'm just going to give a brief DPS overview. DPS stands for damage per second. Your primary job is to deal damage and help your team with objectives. These characters have high damage output abilities, but typically have lower health pools. They also tend to have less utility than the likes of a tank or support. Now let's step into our 4-phase DPS plan. Hero selection is probably one of the most important things to understand as a DPS player. Given that the DPS role has the most selection of heroes in the game, this means that there's going to be more counter picks and more matchups to understand. This means it's very important to understand your character's identity and how they want to play inside of a team composition. Now I'm going to give an example of how important the hero selection screen can actually be. Say the enemy team has a Mei and Symmetra. In this situation, as a DPS player, Pharah would be a great counter, as Mei and Symmetra don't have a reliable way of hitting Pharah out of the sky. So in this specific situation, DPS matchups do exist inside of Overwatch. Now let's take a look at a second example where the enemy team is playing the same character as you. In this situation, you have to look at what the rest of the enemy team is playing. If the enemy team has a Reinhardt, Junkrat might be a good pick. However, if the enemy team also has a Pharah, Junkrat might not be the best pick in this situation, as he has no reliable damage for Pharah. So in this particular case, Bastion would be a better choice. The hero selection screen and knowing when to switch characters is what separates good players versus great players. What I suggest is having 4 to 5 characters that you are proficient with that can cover all bases. For myself personally, I recommend having one character that is your quote-unquote main character. This is the character that you're going to know the ins and outs of and plays good in most matchups. For myself personally, this character is Soldier 76. I find that he's a very easy character to play and consistent for solo queue. However, on specific maps such as Push, I will opt to play something with more mobility like Tracer or Symmetra for King of the Hill style maps that are very closed off, which is an environment that she thrives in. Another recommendation for hero select is to play characters that are very easy to play. If you're playing characters like Genji and Tracer every single game, you're gonna have a harder time trying to climb. Like look at me, I literally play Soldier and Symmetra. I would argue some of the easiest DPS characters to play. By playing easier characters to play, it will allow you to actually learn the fundamentals of the role and understand what characters are good in different situations. Now moving into our second phase of our 4-phase plan, we have positioning. Positioning correctly in Overwatch 2 will give you a better view of the battlefield. It will also allow you to spot enemies and avoid oncoming threats. Additionally, it allows you to react accordingly and make better decisions inside of the game. Now, positioning in Overwatch ties hand in hand with the hero selection screen. Based on whatever character you pick, kind of determines how you're going to be positioning inside of the team. I want to draw your attention to the background footage for a second. In this particular game, I locked in Tracer, and I know Tracer acts as a flanking character. As Tracer's identity, she excels at doing this much better than somebody like Soldier 76, who relies on a more front-to-back style team fight. The goal of positioning with your characters as a DPS player is to really excel at what they're good at. On top of this, you also want to be aware of the threats and position accordingly. In this Cassidy clip, we can see that the enemy team is trying to push for the high ground, so we all make the smart decision to back up and give them the space that they're about to take. This allows us as a team to reposition together instead of one of us just getting caught out and dying for free. Now in this team fight, I absolutely whiffed tremendously, but due to positioning alone correctly, it allows us to win the team fight and ultimately win the game. Now the only reason this happened is because of our positioning. We identified the incoming threat from the Maga and the Kiriko ult, allowing us to reposition and not die. Now another very important point as a DPS player is to utilize your positioning to generate opportunities for your teammates. Now this is an example of generating an opportunity for my teammates. I opt to teleport them onto site, in which it's contested almost right away. Now instead of taking the teleporter right away, I actually opt to take the bridge and try to see if I can get a flank on the opposing supports. This play actually turned out to be very smart, as I was able to find the Ana, Zenyatta, and Sojourn in the backline. Ultimately, this 3K allowed our team to capture the point and win the game. And this Cassidy clip was the same game as before. I find a good chunk onto the Kiriko, so I opt to drop down, finish her off, and then I also get the Magma out of position because he overextended to try and kill me. These are the split-second decision and opportunities that DPS players can make that can ultimately help them win games in the long run. Now, the next phase of the DPS plan that coincides with positioning is playing your life. And the reasoning for this one is very simple. You will win significantly more games the less you die. It's all correlated. Understanding what your character does, knowing how to position properly, will equal less deaths, which will give you more wins. Now there's just a few tips that I can give for this. Number one is to work on your movement. Stop walking in straight lines, be evasive, use your crouch key and movement of your hero as best as you can. You want to make it very hard for the enemy team to kill you by standing behind cover whenever possible, standing behind your tank, and not exposing yourself to multiple angles of attack. Having good movement and playing your life will also help you build a distraction for the enemy team. Harassing the enemy team, they will be forced to deal with your presence, and if they don't deal with your presence, you'll be able to free fire and get free damage off of that. Ultimately, your goal should be to deal as much damage as possible while not endangering yourself and playing your life. The fourth step to the 4-phase DPS plan is just going to be your actual gameplay. Now there's three main things that I think about when it comes to gameplay, and those three are target selection, abilities, and your ultimate usage. Target selection as a DPS player is critical. A general rule of thumb is that you always want to focus the supports first, because once they are gone, it is easier to eliminate the rest of the team with ease. Now when it comes to abilities in Overwatch 2 all have a purpose. Don't just waste them for no reason. All abilities in this game are extremely strong. Having good ability usage can definitely make or break a team fight, which can ultimately win or lose you the game. Speaking of abilities, your ultimate ability is one of the most impactful abilities in the entire game. Usually DPS ultimates are high damage abilities that can clear entire enemy teams instantly. Sometimes it's better to save these ultimates for a setup ultimate such as Zarya's ult, but for the most part, you shouldn't be saving your ultimate because you're losing general value. For example, if I'm saving my ultimate for the optimal 2 to 3 kills, chances are that might never come. So sometimes it's even better to just pop your ultimate when the team fight's already been won and just clear out the rest of the enemy team. Obviously, knowing when to use your ultimate is a skill thing and up to your discretion, but generally they're not abilities that should be wasted. You have to find that balance of not wasting it and using it within a reasonable time. If you enjoyed the video today, please consider subscribing. It's free and you can always unsubscribe at any time. Peace.